Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. My name is Lee Hutchison, and joining me on this socially distanced return to the cinema to see Tenet with 92 miles between us is Dallas King. Welcome back, Dallas.
Good to be back. As the crow flies, I guess. Not
Yeah.
if you're driving.
Yeah, I took the Google Maps, the quickest route to Aberdeen was 92 miles. So, naturally, we kind of mentioned this last week in hope and expectation that we would be able to do sort of a Tenant initial kind of reaction podcast, and we'll touch on the DC FanDome event as well. But Dallas, obviously, I've been going to cinema for a couple of weeks now. I've seen the Dark Knight trilogy, I've seen the Lord of the Rings extended trilogy, and a few other films.
Rubbing it in.
This was
rubbing
your
it in.
yeah. This was your first trip back in months. How was your experience?
166 days. It was 166 days since I saw The Hunt at Cineworld, and I was back today. Finally, Aberdeen came out of its second lockdown a couple of days earlier, but I think the plan was always for cinemas to reopen today for Tenet. Personally, I would have maybe opened them a couple of days earlier just to give them a chance to make sure everything was still working properly, and so the staff were at least aware of how everything was going to work rather than throwing them into the deep end. And certainly on initial visit, everything seemed to be fine. There was hand sanitizer on availability. They scanned your ticket. There was no, anything like that. The pick and mix had been removed. People could still buy popcorn and stuff like that. They're questionable hot dogs, etc. But I stuck with some snacks which I smuggled in, um, and it was back off to the races. Ads, trailers, and then for me it was a case of it's like I never left because it got to the BBFC certificate and then it shut down, lights up, and it was like, oh right, okay. Went out, told the person, and then they got the duty manager who was like, oh, oh no, not today. I mean, it's like, and basically all it meant is, I mean, as a former projectionist, I basically tell them all it basically means is someone has forgotten to put the actual film file of Tenet in the playlist, and all you need to do is create a brand new one, stick it in, and then we go. But of course, that meant it took them 20 minutes to do that, and I could hear the person because I was up at the back of the screen, someone talking, basically having to phone someone who wasn't in that day and getting them to talk them through how to do that. So that was a bit of fun. But once it got started, it was fine. I mean, there was probably only about sort of 10 people in my screening. This was sort of like the first one. It's sort of 10:15 in the morning. Everyone was very spaced out. From what I could see, the majority of people kept their masks on throughout. There was a couple of people eating popcorn and stuff like that, but I don't know if it's a post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, but post sort of lockdown thing. But people seem to be maybe behaving themselves a little bit more on the screen. There was certainly nobody checking their phone or anything like that. But I guess the people who maybe were doing that in the cinema beforehand are maybe not the target audience of who are going to be initially rushing back to do that because they found out they can waste their time in other places perhaps.
Yeah, my screening, I went to an IMAX one, and it was the Cineworld seems to be very different from the View in terms of its three seats either side of a person or a booking. So it was very spaced out. I noticed a documentarian filmmaker Mark Cousins was in the front row of my screening, which was added a bit of VIP to my screening. But yeah, everyone seemed really well behaved. When I went to my first screening a kind of couple weeks ago, it felt like everyone was sort of on the masks, and it would be a bit sort of more hit and miss as kind of the weeks go on. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of tracks. I think it'll be interesting as well because we've seen this on a Wednesday morning, so you can imagine a lot of people are still working from home. So it will be interesting to see what the crowds are like at weekend screenings for Tenet, New Mutant, and whatever else is to come.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already planning a second trip back to Tenet. I don't know if I'm going to watch the entire thing, but I will certainly be back probably next week if it is confirmed that the June trailer plays in front of it from the 31st. And I'll basically do what I did when I was at Cineworld about 20 years ago for the Phantom Menace trailer. I'll basically book a ticket, watch the June trailer, and then probably head back to work after I've gone and seen New Mutants, because I think I'm seeing that on the Monday, just for me to find out if it is in fact a real film or not. I'm still not convinced until I actually have seen the entire thing. I'm not gonna be able to convince otherwise. I think it's just an elaborate prank at this point.
So it's obviously been a few hours now since we've seen the film. In the meantime, in the in between period, I've gone and had a Wagamama. So I've sat with my thoughts for a few hours, and the same for yourself. Dallas, if I was to ask you, sort of off the top of your head, what was your initial reaction to Nolan's 11th feature, Tenet? Then
I think I think the big question is, is it going to be the film which gets people back into the cinema? In some ways, yes, and in probably some ways, no. Is it a perfect film? Certainly not. Is it a film which will be best appreciated on the big screen? Absolutely. It is made for that big screen experience, and I'm excited to sort of hear your thoughts on how it worked on IMAX as well. But I think I don't know if it was the fact that we had that break in between the BBFC logo and then it just suddenly coming straight on. But I mean, this is a film which basically drops you in at the deep end straight away, and it's a bit discombobulating to begin with. I think I've complained on previous podcasts about films which overdo the sort of Basil exposition side of thing. This one could potentially have maybe done with a little bit more. Um, I think for the first hour in particular, it is sort of you're just trying to get your head around everything that's going on. But I think when you enter the sort of final third and all the sort of threads sort of come together, you're left with a very attractive and very warm fitting jumper, I think. So yeah, I did enjoy it. I did have small caveats. I think they would be ironed out. Continuing a jumper theme, they would be ironed out on a second viewing, but certainly by the end of it, I really enjoyed myself, and I was very happy to be back in the cinema watching something like that.
I'm not too sure. I, I don't know, to be honest. Like, this is the first time I can sort of start vocalizing my thoughts. Like, I went to see it myself, had some dinner myself afterwards, came home, played some Football Manager. I haven't really spoken about all the things that are going kind of around my head. My initial feeling is, and this is a testament to sort of Nolan's filmography, is that this is probably bottom of the pile just now for Nolan films.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit later on. I find myself at kind of war with myself, and I found myself in this position with big blockbuster films before, films that I'm very excited for, that I have a lot of expectation going in. Like, I had not made up my mind whether this was going to be a good film or negative. I thought, like, I know Nolan can do James Bond really well. I know that he can do sci-fi really well. I know at times he's blended the two very well. I love the cast. I'm really excited by some of these new talents that he's working with. Um, and then sort of like when the reviews sort of seemed to drop kind of a week or so ago when the embargo broke, I mean last Friday, it was to say sort of it was a largely positive reaction with some kind of negative outliers. But then that sort of just kind of tempered my expectations a little bit. But I came away from it that I had a good idea of what was going on with the film. But was I enjoying it? Not necessarily. I think when I think of a lot of the other Nolan films, whether it's Dunkirk with what he's done with war movies, Interstellar with what he did with the sci-fi genre, Batman movies with the comic book, and a lot of his other work, I've it's kind of kept me guessing. I've really not. I've been surprised by the way that he's gone, and it's always been in a way that's played well for me. But when I watched this, I was just like, I've kind of seen this done better elsewhere, and I could, by and large, most of the key points I saw where they were going to kind of go the whole time. That's not to say I saw where the whole plot was going to go, but like the kind of main points, I kind of went the way I expected. And I was sitting there thinking, going, yeah, this is a really good film. And then you're sort of like kind of reviewing it in your head, going, I think I'm enjoying this. It's good, but there's this and this. And you always, I often find when I'm thinking like that, that's often like a little star or half star extra in my head than from what it really is. And I just kind of came out a bit going, well, that was a film. Whether it's going to be a success in the cinema, I'm not too sure. I think it no doubt will be, at the end of the day. But I I came away thinking I really want to see the new James Bond movie more than probably seeing this a second time.
Interesting, yeah, because I mean, the James Bond thing is inescapable. I mean, ever since Inception, everyone's sort of saying, "Oh, when's Christopher Nolan going to make a Bond film? You know, he's going to do Bond at some point." And it's like he doesn't have to because this is if you took the inversion uh, aspect out of it, this is essentially a Bond film, isn't it? You've got this sort of protagonist who is called the protagonist, and he's basically working in the arena of espionage. There's a threat, this threat of world war or a world-ending event that must be stopped. You've got this stereotypically Russian oligarch person who's behind it all, who's got an estranged wife that the person then has to kind of romance and gets a connection with. You've then got people who provide gadgets. You've got, then this sort of big climactic finale where everything sort of comes together. And I mean, it is him essentially doing Bond. Even the sort of beginning with it, sort of almost the tail end of another mission before he then sort of starts the main sort of journey as well. I mean, it's Bond in as far as Nolan is doing Bond without actually doing Bond, I thought. And I don't think he'll be stepping into that arena. And it's like, even like with the fact that he's got like for the first time, he's got like someone providing a song for the end credits as well and things like that. So, I mean, that was sort of very apparent. But for me, it was interesting to see that the biggest influence on it, and I don't know how much I can say at this point, was actually Doctor Who, and in particular one episode, Silence in the Library. I'm going to leave it at that. But there was a lot of, as the Doctor would say himself, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff going on, and how it all sort of connects together with various sort of explanations of grandfather paradoxes and stuff like this. And for the most part, I think in terms of potential plot holes and everything, it actually all tied together quite nicely. I think in the end, it all sort of worked out. I'm sure there is probably plot holes as big as the atmosphere in here somewhere, but on first viewing, it certainly seemed to sort of tie up together quite nicely by the end, I thought.
Yeah, so obviously we can touch on the concept of time inversion. We've seen that play out in some of the promo materials and adverts where no, it's not time travel, it's time inversion. Did you think the whole time inversion concept worked, and did it work for you on sort of a first viewing where you're like, yeah, I get the whole concept? Did it work?
I think it did work overall. Yeah, there was. Yeah, it sort of takes a little while for you to get your head around in the fact that I mean, this is kind of covered. I think anything in the sort of first third opening act, I think we can probably fair to discuss because it's kind of touched upon in the trailers and whatever. But it seems to be initially that it's objects which are inverted. They're sort of get this sort of radiation, which means that they're was it the entropy is reversed, so therefore they're actually moving backwards in time rather than forward, and they can be manipulated in that way. But then I think as we move on, it's quickly sort of established it's not just objects. It's like people can also do it as well and stuff like that. And you've got the things about, it hasn't happened yet. And then you get people fighting in reverse and forward and stuff like that. So, I mean, it takes a little while for you to get your head around. I mean, Nolan's never been one to sort of spoon feed his audience. He likes to make them work for it. Obviously, with this being like the big film to get people back in, it is maybe a bit of an ask for people, sort of diving straight into a film, maybe as, people might want something a bit more mindless that they can just switch off and escape the world outside and just enjoy. This one, you do need to think, you do need to pay attention, stuff like that. So you do need to do that. But I think I had no issues with the mechanics of it, and I think it did work out quite nicely overall, I thought.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I think there's probably going to be an entire market of new YouTube videos that open up where it's like the Tenet ending explained, time travel explained, and so on. I mean, obviously, right at the beginning, of kind of Tenet, we are introduced to the scene that we do see in a lot of the trailers and materials, that I have one word for you, you tenant. Did the idea of this sort of secret society and kind of code word, did that kind of go the way you expected? Because for me, I felt that was something that didn't kind of, that was what I thought the main part of this film was going to be about, would be this sort of secret society and network, etc. But it didn't seem to sort of go that way by and large.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, I think with the sort of Bond parallels, you were maybe expecting this to be more of like a sort of Spectre type organization that he was needing to infiltrate, whereas it was very much almost like sort of a man on a mission trying to stop a nuclear war type of thing. But I mean, I could see that the the Tenet sort of organization in universe could potentially be explored in a sequel or spin-off television series, perhaps that you could go more down the line. uh, the film may or may not leave it open for that. I'm not going to say any more, but I mean, do you think that we could potentially see more adventures in the world of Tenet?
Maybe sort of similar to Inception, that I think they did, where it was like a little mini comic book or something like that that came inside some of the Blu-rays, sort of like an Inception little prologue or something like that. Maybe we'll see that. I can't see sort of Nolan creating a TV series or there being a spin-off movie. It doesn't seem to be sort of his MO. It's always onto the next thing. I think he's done that work with the Dark Knight trilogy, but I think this is probably the last we'll see of sort of the Tenet protagonists and antagonists and concept. But I wouldn't rule out some sort of special feature on the Blu-rays or little a little comic book insert or something like that. That's probably about it.
So I mean, in terms of like, I know that you had issues with sort of maybe sort of connecting into the film, sort of, but on an emotional level. Was that due to like the main character, the protagonist? Because in like Interstellar, you've got Matthew McConaughey's journey, and he's got like this emotional connection back on Earth with his daughter. Inception, you're with Cobb as he's got this thing about he wants to get home to his kids and stuff like that. Was it maybe like the main character was maybe too sort of thinly sketched, or did you not sort of perhaps buy into the potential sort of bond type relationship he had with the distressed wife to be?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, I think. Like, I thought John David Washington as the protagonist was good. And I mean, I saw that there was a whole discourse last week about him. Tenet not being amusing or anything like that. I thought like the protagonist had some quite amusing lines, to be honest, and I just didn't find, sort of outside of probably the protagonist, I didn't find much of the characters that engaging, or the villain. When you think of like when Nolan's done villains in the past, especially with obviously the Dark Knight trilogy, Memento, Insomnia, those have had sort of like an antagonist in it, and I've always found them to be quite charismatic and interesting. I didn't really get that with sort of Kenneth Branagh's Andre. I think he was sort of a better Russian villain in the Jack Reacher reboot, to be honest. It was just, I just didn't find the plot that engaging and as exciting as sort of a sci-fi spy drama. I just thought it was like, I know Nolan can do better in this genre. I've seen it outside of this, and even sort of television, sort of it handled that a little bit more better. I just didn't find it that great, or the action itself not that sort of standoutish as well. I know I think we'll come on to that later about the action scenes, but again, sort of Nolan in the past sort of had his critics about how he shot action, and I think he proved them wrong time and time again. With this one, a little less so. It's difficult when you judge a film like this, because it's very hard not to connect it with other kind of Nolan films. These things all end up getting ranked, and I mean, I put together, like off the top of my head, a top 11 Nolan films, and like you could put something at 8 or 10 or 11, and the line between that and number 5 could be incredibly thin. So it's very, very difficult. I don't know about you, but it's hard not to put these things on a scale sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with the Kenneth Branagh thing. I think he was at times probably the weak link of the film. Where I mean, are we really still at the stage where they have to get British actors to play Russian villains? I mean, that was like a staple of like the 80s and 90s with like, Gary Oldman in Air Force One and stuff. And there's times when he's like sort of screaming at people and it just almost becomes a bit of a parody. And I think that was a bit of a weak link for me. But I thought, I mean, Elizabeth Debicki, always great. But again, maybe the criticism of Nolan and his writing of female characters might potentially come back in here. I mean, she's certainly one of the more stronger characters. I mean, she does there's a car stunt in here that only Elizabeth Debicki could do due to her stature. I thought it was just really well done in the fact that I'm not going to say what it is, but if you see it, it's like it's like she's just like the perfect size to be able to do that without any sort of special effects or anything like that. I thought she was good, but I mean, Robert Pattinson as if you think, I mean, in terms of character names for this, with John David Washington being the protagonist, I wasn't expecting the second lead of the year's biggest blockbuster to be called Neil. To be honest, I almost laughed out loud when he introduced himself and he said, "I'm Neil," and I'm like, "Huh, okay."
I
I
think
mean,
that's
what did
definitely
you
been the
make
big
of
twist for.
Arpats? Yeah,
Yeah, I had the same chuckle. I was like, oh, at first with like the sentence, I was like, Neo? Did they say Neo? And then it was like, no, it's Neo. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, that was the big surprise for me of the film. I mean, obviously we've said it time and again, we are Robert Pattinson fans. Um, I didn't think he got the greatest amount to do in this one. He sort of just remains a bit mysterious and sort of slightly sidelined at points in the film. At the beginning, I think when obviously we see this big stunt with like the plane, and obviously it's been in the trailers where it's like, so we're gonna smash a plane into something, and it's gonna be a big plane, and that bit's the bit dramatic. And I thought at the beginning, oh, this is a really kind of unique character, this Neil guy, very funny. I'm really excited to see where it sort of unravels over the film, but it doesn't sort of go beyond sort of just being mysterious and on the sidelines. I thought Pattinson was slightly kind of you know, not his best film and sort of not one where I thought he was particularly well used.
I thought he was. I love the fact that in terms of creating the character, it's like in terms of costume design, he just sort of went, well, I'm just going to wear what Chris wears on set. So he had a lot of like suits, and he had a lot of neckerchiefs, scarves, and all that kind of stuff. And even his hair is very Christopher Nolan. So he basically just decided to style him off of that. And like a lot of the stuff he's talking about is like, justifying, driving a plane into a building is basically probably just verbatim of what Christopher Nolan did when he was in the studio room explaining what he wanted to do in a stunt. It's like, well, can we do it CGI? And he says, no, we'll just buy a plane. It's probably cheaper to just buy a plane and drive it into a building. But you do have to admire someone who, when that spot is at the end of a trailer, that almost sounds like that's going to be the big climax of the film. And when that's in like almost like the end of Act One, almost, and then it's like, okay, well, where's it going to go from here? And then, I mean, it does go into quite an amazing sort of sequence at the end where time is moving forward and backward simultaneously. And I can understand why there was reports of apparently where they would have to film several scenes forwards and then do it in reverse as well in order to try and get everything to match up. I can imagine that as an editor and sort of special effects people, I can imagine that must have been quite tricky to work on.
Yeah, it's certainly one of those ones I'd love to see sort of more behind the scenes kind of footage on the making of this and how they put the action sequences together. I know just about an hour ago the Tenet Twitter page put up sort of a behind the scenes clip, so it's about 9 minutes long. That, if people are interested, was the footage before Inception, the 10th anniversary screening, which is basically the behind the scenes sort of puff piece for Tenet. So if you're looking for a bit of behind the scenes action but not the most detail or insight, that's the kind of place to go. But it was really quite interesting to sort of see how it worked, and it must have been a logistical nightmare to shoot and to kind of write and direct something like that.
Yeah, no, I think I read today that I think John David Washington and Kenneth Branagh, apparently when they were taken into Christopher Nolan's office and sat under lock and key to read the script, apparently they both took several hours reading it because they were kind of going forwards and then sort of going back and forth over it, trying to get their heads around it. Where you'd be doing one scene and then later on you'd be doing the same scene again, but in reverse and stuff like that. So, yeah, continuity. The person in charge of continuity in that film must have been tearing their hair out at times. But I mean, certainly on initial view on the big screen, it certainly seemed to pass muster. I mean, I'm interested to know sort of in terms of IMAX, was there much visible difference? I mean, do you know sort of how many sort of scenes and stuff were shot on IMAX? Was there sort of much ratio changes on the big screen?
I didn't notice any sort of ratio changes kind of myself. I'm often one of those people that sometimes it takes the second screening for me to kind of pick up on that. I never noticed any ratio changes. I think, don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure how much of the film was shot in IMAX. Yeah, IMAX was good. The sound was it was one of the best things about it, obviously. But I didn't have the same sort of IMAX experience that I did with, say, kind of Interstellar, the Dark Knight trilogy, Dunkirk, etc., where I felt it would probably just still be just as good in sort of the standard sort of format or catching it on film. In terms of the big set pieces, a lot of them are quite intimate when they kind of happen. You've got the car chase, which I didn't feel it necessarily needed to be seen in IMAX, and you've obviously got it towards the beginning, this plane crashing scene, which again good in IMAX, but I think it was more sort of a sound experience was great in IMAX as opposed to sort of the action itself. It just didn't pack the same punch as some previous other Nolan films, or things like Skyfall, for example, which was also in 2D IMAX.
Yeah. I'm curious, you're talking about the sound there in terms of, I mean, what did you make of the score? Because this is the first film in many years, actually, that Hans Zimmer actually hasn't scored for Christopher Nolan. Instead, we've got Black Panther's Ludwig Göransson. I mean, did you, what did you make of the score sort of on first viewing? I mean,
Yeah, I thought it was a good score. There was definitely some of the tracks I was really excited to listen to on a soundtrack afterwards. I haven't had a chance to check out on Spotify or anything yet to see if they were up. I thought some of them were really good, especially the sort of theme that you hear playing in the trailer, I believe. Yeah, I thought it was good. No one's ever as good as Zimmer, but you could sort of see echoes of kind of Zimmer's work or inspiration in that score. But I suppose with someone like Nolan, for example, as great as Zimmer is, I always get the impression Nolan has a very clear concept of what he wants from the music, the sound design. He often gives inspiration to Zimmer in terms of, I think it was like a ticking of a clock from Inception from his own pocket watch. So I can imagine that the soundtrack was very well controlled, as it were, from Nolan's end. What did you make of the score? Was this one like Zimmer's work that you'd love to hear live, or did it not pass the mustard for you?
I did like it. Yeah, no, there was definitely clear echoes of Zimmer. You could certainly hear points where it was clear that he would have had an influence in some form or another. But I thought it definitely was good at sort of driving the film forward at times, the momentum and sort of bringing you in and out of those sort of big moments and stuff like that. So, but it's again with a lot of sort of film scores, it's sometimes sort of second viewing or just like you say, listening to it on Spotify, where you can really sort of get into it, and then sort of rewatching the film sometimes then it sort of enhances the experience and stuff. So I'm interested to would I watch it on a live score? I'm not sure. Certainly maybe not after initial one. Was there any sort of one particular standout track where I would want to listen to that? Say like Time and Inception is an instant classic, so it doesn't have that moment yet. But after a few listens to, who knows? But it's a trade off I'm willing to make in the fact that we're going to get Hans Zimmer scoring June at the end of the year. So yeah, I'm willing to make that trade.
Yeah. So, what were some of your potential highlights of Tenet that you could kind of talk about at the moment in time?
That I can talk about. I think sort of like the main sort of the finishing of Act One with the sort of breaking into this vault where they have to use a plane in order to do that. I thought that was really well handled and sort of is your first real sort of glimpse into how the sort of time inversion is going to work in terms of action and stuff like that. I thought that was great, and I thought actually, I mean, I didn't expect to get a bit of an emotional sucker punch from someone sort of riffing on a line from Casablanca. I have to say, um, I can't really talk about it in too much detail because it comes in sort of like the sort of the final act. But that moment actually really sort of got me, and it was one of the more emotional moments I thought I'd had a Nolan film, because sometimes they can be quite cool, but I think that one got me right in the gut there. So there was sort of like, yeah, I think it's it's a film which I think I will need to take a couple of viewings in order to really sort of nail down and discover if I truly appreciate it and where it will sit in the Nolan canon. But certainly in terms of a return to the big screen spectacle, I don't think I could have really asked for much more. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think, like, as I say, I enjoyed sort of the opening sort of scene. Sort of, obviously people have seen this. I think it was attached to some screenings of The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, I never got it. Was the opening sort of scene in this Hungarian opera house. I thought that was a really good introduction to sort of this film and sort of the protagonist. So yeah, that was really positive. You know, it was always good to sort of see Michael Caine, though I couldn't quite tell what was going on with his accent. If that's what he now sounds like, or if he was putting on an accent, but it certainly sounded like a weird sort of English accent that he was kind of going for in this film. And I thought, and I'm going to stick up for the film a little bit as well, where I thought there was some, you know, hysterical kind of little funny one-liners. I mean, the idea that kind of Nolan is this woodcock kind of person when it comes to comedy, I don't think it's true at all. I thought there was some quite amusing little one-liners in that, like, oh, I hope you've not slept with my wife yet, yeah, or something like that. And he's like, oh, I've not slept with your wife yet, which I thought was quite funny. And I thought the surprise appearance of an actor in the third act kind of surprised me, like, oh, I didn't expect to see him pop up in this, so that was quite amusing as well. Unless I was sort of completely out of the loop on the casting. But yeah, it was one of those films that, you know, I always think, you know, ultimately the film could have gone either way when it came to the third act. I always think Nolan does climaxes better than anyone, you know, bringing together all these threads. But I thought the climax to this film, you know, the main action piece, was probably one of the most disappointing in his kind of filmography. I just didn't think the action just didn't tie everything together very well, and ultimately just went, as I say, kind of where it went, sadly. What about yourself? Did you, obviously we won't touch on it, but what did you make of the kind of closing action sequence?
I really enjoyed it. I like the fact that there was sort of these two teams both attempting to do what do they call it, a temporal pincer movement. You'll understand when you see the film. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of that kind of thing, but I like the sort of two different. Actually, there was three plot threads all happening at the same time, so I like the fact that they were all sort of trying to tie together. But I think it could be. I was able to follow and notice certain things that I thought were going to get called back later, and they did. But I think it is the kind of thing where you could, if you sort of bend down to get your popcorn or take a drink or something at one point, you could potentially miss something, which then you then miss out on a big sort of emotional payoff moment or a big moment later on. I think you really need to keep your wits about you in that sort of final sort of half hour sequence. Otherwise, you could end up sort of feeling a little bit shortchanged by it all. I thought it was very well done, but yeah, it could get a little bit too confusing for some, I think.
Yeah, do you think this is gonna help with cinemas? You know, a 2.5 hour long time travel, no, sorry, time inversion kind of film. Do you think this is gonna bring in families, or is this just gonna be, you know, the best hope really for cinemas until probably like No Time to Die comes out in November, because it's gonna be slim pickings for the next few months anyway.
I think it will be very popular. I don't think it'll be popular with families. I know it was cut to get a 12A, but I don't think it's the family film that cinemas need right now. Unfortunately for them, that film was probably going to be Mulan, and then Disney Plus decided to just stick it on Disney Plus for 19.99 and basically screw cinemas out of a big family film for a few months. Actually, I'm not really sure what else that's gonna be able to get the families in, because that's really what they need at the moment. Because this is going to appeal to a sort of older age group who are going to be coming in sort of like on their own or in couples. You're not going to get sort of big groups coming to the. I mean, obviously they don't want big groups coming in because the more people it's difficult. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what the box office numbers are like at this, because I know most multiplexes are probably, say if they've got 10 screens, Tenet's on 6 of them probably. And I know that some people actually the person who was at your IMAX screening, Mark Cousins, he's always moaning about the fact that cinema, multiplexes are only screening one film, like 83 screenings of Tenet in Edinburgh on one particular day. And it's like, well, in this respect, post lockdown, I can actually see it working to their advantage, because then you're not overcrowding any one particular screen. You're giving people more opportunity to spread out over the day, and therefore not risking anyone's sort of health and stuff like that with the masks and hand sanitizer. Hopefully, it should mean. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone they definitely have to get back to the cinema to come see this. It's all clearly, a personal choice. We've done that discourse to death already on this podcast, and offline and online. So, if you do want to go to the cinema, I think it's a great way to get back into it. It's got huge scale, scope, and spectacle, and that's what I wanted, and I'm glad that I saw it. But I think it's probably a film which would benefit from being able to watch it a couple of times over a weekend at home. Perhaps you won't get the same sort of sheer scale, but I think it's potential to maybe sort of follow it and rewind. Actually, you could do your own inversion at home by sort of rewinding and replaying bits, and so perhaps in that respect it might work better at home. But certainly in terms of the big screen spectacle, I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to be back at the cinema, I have to say.
Where does this kind of place, if you've had time to think about it, where would this place in sort of your Nolan sort of filmography? Would it be sort of top, middle, bottom?
I'd probably say, just off the top of my head, just after one viewing, I'd probably put it around about the middle to lower mid. I think I enjoyed it more than, say, like Insomnia, Following, and stuff like that. Maybe initially, maybe put it over like Batman Begins, but I mean, it's not The Prestige. It's probably not as polished as Inception. But I mean, you've got the Dark Knights up there, so I'd say probably sort of mid just now. But talk to me in a couple of weeks after I've seen it a couple more times, and I might have a different answer for you. What about yourself? I think you said probably sort of mid to low end.
Yeah, I did a quick off the top of my head with feeling. Some of these films have been with me for years, so this is just off the top of my head, initial reaction. Tenet, which I would give out like a 3 out of 5, so that gives you a bit of a bearing. Be Tenet, Insomnia, Following, Inception, Dunkirk, The Dark Knight Rises, Batman Begins, Memento, The Prestige, The Dark Knight, Interstellar. So that's how the Nolan filmography kind of ranks up for me so far.
I see. So even his worst film is still a 3 out of 5. But if you say like stuff like that on the internet, the Nolan fans, they will come for you and say that you just didn't understand the film properly. You clearly weren't paying enough attention and stuff like that. So you got to be careful what you say. And speaking of Robert Pattinson's return to blockbuster filmmaking, that moves us swiftly onto another film which made quite a splash this week, and that was The Batman, which had its trailer and poster premiere at DC FanDome, an entirely virtual event, and could potentially be the way forward for press and advertising and marketing purposes in the world post COVID. So, Lee, I believe you were not watching it live. You were enjoying the extended edition of Lord of the Rings at the cinema, being where film fans should be. But I was stuck at home watching it on my phone. And what did you make of DC FanDome? Did you like the production value, or did you just end up watching the trailers on YouTube afterwards?
Yeah, I just watched the trailers on YouTube afterwards. I think we're going to probably be seeing a lot more of these kind of things coming in the future. It feels like it's, you always used to think of Marvel and DC would be there every single year at kind of Comic Con, but, I think with, these D23s or whatever they're called and so on, it seems like a lot of these sort of studios are now going, well, why should we sort of go along to Comic Con, squeeze everything we can into an hour, despite the fact that you think of like iconic memories like the whole Avengers cast all coming together and some of the trailers, then going, why not do something for the fans where we have more control and can really make an event. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of these, and perhaps Comic Con itself being a sort of a less relevant for a lot of these places like DC, Marvel, and perhaps Star Wars, etc.
Yeah, no, because Star Wars Celebration cancelled this year, and I know they're planning to bring it back next year. But I mean, that's certainly something that could go entirely digital as well. And I mean, I was thinking that this was actually going to be a completely live event, but it was quite clear from very early on that a lot of the stuff had probably been pre-recorded and was then presented almost as live. I mean, I know that Comic Con San Diego Comic Con had done something similar earlier this year, but basically they just recorded some Zoom panels and then basically put it up on YouTube. And I think what the fans were missing about that was the chance to interact with people and stuff like that. The Hall H has always given such great moments, whether it's like Tom Hiddleston coming out in character as Loki and sort of getting whipping the crowd up into a frenzy, or the funny answers that stars who clearly didn't want to be there, say like Harrison Ford at Cowboy and Aliens, would have to deal with insane fan questions as they came up and dressed as like Han Solo and stuff like that. So that kind of thing is missing, but it's the chance for a studio or company to control the whole event and make it all about them. This was basically 24-hour event. It was essentially an 8-hour event, then repeated 3 times over the thing. But you had basically this virtual set where you had these presenters in like a Thunderdome thing. WWE are now doing something similar. They can't have real fans at their events, so they've actually built a wall of screens around the ring so people can essentially be there live. So you've kind of got that. They're in this dome, and then they bring in people via Zoom or via satellite, and who appear to be there with them, but then sort of talk and introduce the film. So there was a lot of panels during the day, but film fans were basically there at the start and end to sort of see the Wonder Woman panel. You had an Aquaman panel. You had Suicide Squad. You had The Rock sort of introducing and teasing stuff about Black Adam. And then you had the main event, which I think was around about 1:30 in the morning UK time, which was the release of the Batman trailer, which actually had technically leaked about an hour before that. But, we don't talk about that because, we like to watch things. Even Matt Reeves, I think, acknowledged saying, "Great to see the enthusiastic reviews so far, but if if you'd like to wait for the official release, that'd be cool." So it's glad to know that. And I think there was a bit of controversy earlier on, wasn't there, when Zack Snyder called someone out on discussing a leaked trailer, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably the highlight for me of this whole DC event, where Zack Snyder. I've got to get the tweet up here because I've got to do it justice. Give me 2 seconds. So Scott Dickerson, who I think works for sort of Forbes magazine, sort of commented, pretty relaxed sort of on the trailer. It was like Scott Mendelson, sorry. So the trailer for Snyder cut of Justice League looks like the same movie? Question mark. Lots of deleted scenes from the marketing campaign, but otherwise it looks like the alternative takes of existing movies. Fair enough. All right. So Zack Snyder commented, "You said you enjoyed the theatrical cut of Justice League like you enjoy your Saturday morning cartoons. Well, this is made for grown-ups, so you're not in the demographic. Also cool of you to comment on a leaked teaser at Scott Mendelson." I thought that was the funniest thing. Like, here's my wrestling reference for the episode. Scott Mendelson worked Zack Snyder into a shoot, and it was the most inoffensive thing you can imagine sort of posting, just like, it kind of looks the same. I mean, that was my thought of it all. But the idea of Zack Snyder posting, well, this is made for grown-ups, so you're not in that demographic. I mean, I'm a Batman fan. I enjoy comic book movies, but it's got like Aquaman and Cyborg and all these sorts of things. And, that dark side. I mean, it kind of isn't a film for grown-ups as such. It's a film for all ages. So this idea that, this is some hardcore adult film, is quite pathetic. And I thought Zack Snyder just embarrassed himself there. And it brings in a lot of what people have had about the discourse around the Snyder Cut, that it seems to have enabled some of the worst of the internet fandom to kind of react to this thing for years now. So yeah, I mean, basically it was just a pile on to this journalist, basically just calling him an idiot, saying Zack Snyder got his ass. It was all quite pathetic, really. But yeah, it was highly amusing to sit on the sidelines and watch and make fun of a bit, I guess.
You were the Richard Iwadi IT crowd grabbing the popcorn meme and just going, ah. But I mean, yeah, no, I mean, I saw the trailer, and to be honest, I have a similar opinion in that it kind of looks like, yeah, cutscenes that never made it into the first movie, and that dark seed shot at the beginning. It's like the CG doesn't look all that great either. It's like, I mean, was the Justice League bad because Joss Whedon took over halfway through, or is it just a bad movie? I mean, could you imagine what these fans are going to do if it turns out that the film is just bad? And not only that,
They're
but
not going to say
a
anything.
4 hour film. Do you think they're not going to say anything? Do you not think they're going to come back with this? Sorry, guys, I got it wrong. I didn't mean it. Oh, you were right. They're too far gone. And I love the fact that basically they're now allowed to celebrate the fact. I mean, this is the thing that a lot of people are upset about, is mainly the fact that they've won essentially by going on about it for so many years, and then getting it now. Essentially, it's like, where does it end? Do you now get new cuts of any other film that the fans didn't like The Last Jedi, or so in some ways a Lord and Miller version of Solo would be actually quite interesting to watch, I think. But there's a limit to that kind of thing, and the fact that that Zack Snyder seems to have doubled down on this, and you can now, admittedly for charity, but still you can buy a T-shirt that says associate producer of the Justice League on the back of the T-shirt. I mean, it's like, really, it's like, that's what you're calling yourselves, associate producer, because you've basically harangued people on the internet until you've finally got a different version of the movie, which might not be good. And by the way, Zack Snyder has done a superhero movie for adults. It was called Watchmen, and the fact that he used the Hallelujah version of the Leonard Cohen song, which was in the worst scene in Watchmen, is quite interesting. And I noticed that Patrick Wilson also commented on that on Twitter, didn't he?
Yeah, I saw that as well, and I think it's one of those things that I wonder if he thinks that the Owls of the Guardians or whatever that owl movie he made. I wonder if he classes
Oh, the
that as
Legends
sort
of
of a movie
Ga'Hoole.
for adults. Yes, exactly. Like, you're not in the demographic for that one. I mean, I'm still pissing myself laughing about that. So, he's made a rod for his own back with that kind of comment. I mean, that's not what you expect from a director. I mean, it's so petulant and pathetic. But yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, he's the Josh Trank of DC, isn't he? He's not going off at people for slagging off his film. But yeah, no, I mean, I actually really liked Watchmen. I thought it was great. Apart from that one scene, I actually thought it was great, and the extended edition of that is very good. So I'll give it. I'm going to end up watching it. I'm not. It's like I'm not going to watch it. Although I haven't actually still haven't watched the Batman versus Superman Dawn of Justice extended cut, but maybe I will before that. I'll give it a go just out of pure curiosity, but I can't say, it's my be all or end all. But, there were other things that got released that seemed to be realigning the DC. Everyone's had this DC versus Marvel thing for years, and they were doing that. And with the Flashpoint movie, which they were discussing, brings in their version of the multiverse. Marvel's already started to do that with Doctor Strange and stuff, and Ant-Man, but they're doing it here, and we're going to get Michael Keaton back as Batman. We're getting Ben Affleck back as Batman. All the different Batmans in this, and basically during that segment, they basically showcased basically every single DC movie so far, which included clips from the Watchmen movie, the Watchmen TV show, and Keanu Reeves as Constantine. So basically, everything that's DC could potentially become canon and be brought back in, and basically allows, I guess, a world where they've made it very confusing, where you've got the standard run where Ben Affleck was Batman, but then you've got Joker as well with Joaquin Phoenix, but he's not the Joker because the Joker was Jared Leto, and then you've got a new version of Batman with Robert Pattinson, but apparently basically it allows him to have all these different strands going at any one particular time. So in terms of like the other content that we saw, basically the main trailers were Wonder Woman 1984. We had The Suicide Squad, which basically allowed people to do a meme of Will Smith going, "So what are we? Some kind of the Suicide Squad?" And then the final trailer for the Batman. So we'll go through each one individually, because I'm assuming, did you watch the Rock segment, or?
No, I didn't see that one. Sadly, I made my wrestling reference for the day, so that's as far as it extends.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, it hasn't started shooting yet. So basically, he couldn't say much apart from like his vision for the film. And then Shazam basically did nothing but it confirmed the title would be Shazam 2: Fury of the Gods. Aquaman basically didn't give us anything apart from the fact it would be more serious and socially relevant. So I'm assuming that means that Aquaman 2 is going to look at the subject of climate change and the pollution of plastic in the ocean. So I guess the enemy is going to be Plastic Man or something like that. But all the way back at the beginning, we had Wonder Woman 1984 trailer. I mean, what did you make of that one? Is this a film that you're looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the new Chris Pine movie. Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan in the world of the first Wonder Woman film. I just can't take to Gal Gadot, or it's. But I love Chris Pine. Obviously, I'm a Star Trek fan. I think he's one of the most charismatic kind of people around. But it was just a film that did nothing for me. Sort of the first time around. Yeah, certainly some interesting moments and imagery, and I'm looking forward to seeing this fish out of water in the 80s. Kind of take. I think that could be some good comedy, but Chris Pine, unfortunately, I have to say, for a female superhero movie, stole the show in the trailer, much like he did the first one. So yeah, I'll definitely see it. But yeah, it's not a character that I'm particularly fussed about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't. I wasn't overall keen when Wonder Woman came out. I mean, at that point, it was the best DC movie of this extended universe so far. But I mean, that it's not really a high bar to jump over at that point. I mean, this trailer. I mean, did it make me any more excited? I mean, the fact that it's going Stranger Things in the 80s. I mean, it's interesting. Like you say, you got this fish out of water thing. It kind of introduced a bit more of the villains. You've got Pedro Pascal as a Trump-like businessman, and then some really dodgy cat-like CGI where Kristen Wiig becomes a member of Cats at the end. It's very awkward, I think, and yeah, I think there'll be a few more passes needed on the special effects in order to make that one ready for whenever it may come out. I think it was meant to be August, but I think we're now looking at November before that one comes out. So yeah, mildly interested, but only as an excuse to get back in the cinema, perhaps. The next one was James Gunn doing the Suicide Squad and simultaneously shattering the hearts of the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy cast who had stood up for him when he got fired by Marvel and got him back in, only to hear him say that this cast of the Suicide Squad is the most talented cast that he's ever worked with. And basically, it's setting up a Dirty Dozen style 1970s esque war movie version where basically not everyone that was introduced in the panel is going to make it through to the end. So, I mean, we didn't get a full trailer, but we got sort of behind the scenes look at the film. I mean, is the sort of introduction of James Gunn enough to make you interested in this? Because I know I wasn't really a fan of Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a new film from James Gunn. But yeah, the trailer was, it is a list of names essentially. But I'm not going to be fooled again by a really good marketing campaign for Suicide Squad and being disappointed. So yeah, I'll see it when it comes out in the cinemas. But in terms of a trailer, there wasn't anything really there to grab me apart from, oh, that's an interesting actor that I forgot was cast in this.
Yeah, no, I mean they're really sort of going down the route of these obscure films. You've got Polka Dot Man, you've got the guy who played the on-set version of Rocket Raccoon as doing a weasel now this time. So yeah, he seems to have found his niche in Hollywood. But I think what they need to do with something like this is to go like throw a curveball and kill off, like, they probably won't kill off Harley Quinn, but probably one of the other main leads who's going to appear in the second one, kill them off early, and so you kind of know all bets are off and stuff. So, and knowing James Gunn's sort of history with like Slither and Dawn of the Dead, I think he could probably do something like that with this movie. So I guess we'll have to see. But the main event really was the Batman trailer, and this is Matt Reeves, who's directed two of the Planet of the Apes movies, which turned out to be one of the most unexpectedly great trilogies of the last decade, and our introduction to Robert Pattinson as Batman. And I have to say that I was very impressed. What about yourself?
Yeah, I was equally impressed. They've done a good job of keeping a lot of this film under wraps. I mean, I know there's been some little leaks of sort of a stunt double kind of kicking around in sort of the cemetery in Glasgow and some bits on the streets of London, but we've not really seen any of sort of the key villains or kind of Pattinson. So yeah, there was a lot to be surprised with in this film. Fortunately, the first time I watched the trailer, it was accidentally the leaked version. When I woke up in the morning, I was like, I can't really make out what's kind of going on there. And then I watched the 4K version, which was much more appealing for sort of dissecting. And yeah, I'm hella excited for that movie. It's it was always going to take a lot to get Robert Pattinson to sign up for a big franchise film like that. So I think he's going to put in a hell of a performance. And it seems that no one is complaining about this trailer, which is staggering for DC and any sort of comic book movie. We've all seemed to kind of have got behind this one.
I know. Where were all those people sort of decrying the fact that Robert Pattinson, what the guy from Twilight, oh, he can't be Batman, even though he's the worst vampire ever, and that he took 12 years to turn into a bat. But I think anyone who's ever listened to Filibuster on this podcast will know that we are huge Robert Pattinson stans and had no qualms about him taking on the cowl. But I think this has just proven everyone correct on this. And I had a tweet from October last year when they cast Paul Dano as the Riddler, and I said I would love to see a really dark take on the Riddler with him leaving riddles for Batman to solve before the next victim dies in a Seven kind of deal. And I think one thing that everyone has quickly latched onto is the fact that basically in all but name is this is almost like a David Fincher version of Batman. It's very Seven-esque in terms of the opening look of it, and it's tapped into that vein of trailers at the moment, which you need to use a sort of almost slowed down version of a popular song. I say popular Nirvana song from the 90s, but I think it's all in keeping with that. It's certainly not going down the Tim Burton or Joel Schumacher route. It's apparently very much a detective story, and I mean, it looks, from what I've seen, the reaction is great, and there seems to be a lot of memes and stuff coming around that scene at the end where he sort of beats a goon to a pulp and then says, "I am vengeance." So yeah, some good sound effects on that. Colin Farrell looking unrecognizable as the Penguin in this and stuff. So I mean, yeah, the signs are great, and the fact that they pulled this really accomplished looking trailer together, apparently having only shot 25% of the film before lockdown happened, is really impressive. And I mean, I've got no qualms. I mean, I liked the Let the Right One In remake that Matt Reeves did, but a lot of people didn't. But as remakes go, I thought it was very, very good, and his work on the Apes films is. So I think we're in very safe hands. And I know that the script was written by the guy who did Project Power on Netflix, which has had mixed reviews. But I think we're looking at something really potentially rather special with this one, don't you think?
Yeah, and it says only in cinemas in 2021, so I'm sure people will be pissed off at that addition.
What, does it say 2021? It has question mark 0
Oh,
question mark 1. So basically, they're basically saying it could be 2021, but who knows given how everything's gone.
yeah, very true.
Indeed. So, yeah, that brings us to the end of another episode. We're going to be back next week with a special DVD commentary of one of our favourite films of the year, Run. So hopefully you'll tune in for that. But in the meantime, stay safe, enjoy Tenet at cinemas, wear a mask, just like John David Washington does in the film, and you'll be fine. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.